just needed time.
Well, I know Sean's not going to be here tonight, so we'll go ahead and get started. I know we got a little bit on our agenda tonight. I'm going to probably we'll do council follow-up. Anything from yesterday or last week's meeting? Quick. I had something stuck in my throat. Anything from last week's meeting that we need to do a follow-up on? Anything? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could take just a second, maybe in this portion. Many of you probably saw my email recently with regard to the appointment of our interim fire chief while we recruit our new fire chief. I wanted to introduce to you Mr. Black here.
Hello,
Why
everybody.
don't you stand up there, Chief?
I recognize some of you. I've met a few of you. I appreciate this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to working with everybody and being a part of this team. So,
Thanks, Chief.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate Jake helping out. Thank you very much. And that is all I had, Mr. Mayor, by way of follow-up.
Appreciate it. Well, we welcome interim chief. Thank you so much for serving, and whatever we can do as a council to help out during that time, please let us know.
appreciate it.
You bet.
Educate me.
Yes. Thank you. Moving on to our budget delivery draft. Go ahead, Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. You should be receiving a document that looks like this, either as a part of your packet or via hard copy, whatever the case may be. We have some here tonight if you'd like one. This is not the budget delivery that we will be, building our presentation off of and having our work session pursuant to and everything else. This is all this is our statutory obligation to give you numbers before we present the budget coming up at the end of this month. So very preliminary. Doesn't give you a whole lot of data other than numbers. We're meeting our statutory obligation by doing this, and that really is all I have on the budget for tonight. So not a lot beyond that. Okay.
Does anybody have any preliminary draft questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Lisa.
What is Miller Street Dormitory?
The Mr. Mayor, Madam Council Member, the city has owned a house over there by the water plant for a number of years that is used to transition employees that are from outside of the community into the community to find housing and so forth. Some years it's more in need of than others. They typically pay a rent and that kind of thing. Again, just to serve as sort of a transition for people to move into the community. That's all it is. It's on Miller Street, which I didn't even know existed, but it does exist, and it is all on city area, city property, kind of within the water treatment plant zone.
Yeah, you lived there for a time.
I did, yeah.
You were transitioning here.
When I was transitioning into the community.
Yeah. Yeah, Bruce.
I did notice the press has already released what you just gave us, and so I would be prepared to answer some very difficult and very hard questions with a $13 million jump in the budget this year.
Okay, sure, yeah, no problem.
Anybody else? Okay. Moving on, the USS Wyoming.
Thank you, sir. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, and I think we have some pictures maybe to put up on the screen here. For more than 20 years, we've had this display up at the event center, which is in kind of the primary area of the concourses and so forth, the entrances into the concourses. And this has been there, I think I read 1998. I didn't remember that it had been there that particular year, but a long time. Many of you probably remember Stan Lowe. He was the one that sort of orchestrated the delivery of this, what they call builder's model, to the event center as its home for of the USS Wyoming. We have been in contact with a couple of veterans groups here locally about the possibility of relocating this model out of the event center and into a museum. I don't know how many of you have been up to Du Bois and seen the new museum that's up there. very impressive facility, and it's built around the idea of military vehicles from years and wars gone by. The proposal is to relocate this model, the USS Wyoming, to that museum in Du Bois as its permanent, we believe, more appropriate home. The event center is becoming more and more difficult to be a home for this model without seeing it incur some damage or whatever. The older it gets, the more concerned we get about its preservation. And so, having worked out an arrangement with the museum, we'd like your blessing to move forward with its relocation to that potentially new home, permanent new home. And with that, if y'all have any questions or other data you'd like from Zulema, who's overseeing this, I'd sure appreciate that.
Got Steve, and then I've got Bruce. Go ahead, Steve.
The one thing I was interested in, by what I read in what was in here, that model is actually property of the U.S. Navy. Is that correct? So even though it transfers to a private museum, he will not take title to it and will not be able to sell it or whatever. Is that also a true statement?
Mayor, council member, yes, that is a true statement. Currently, we have an agreement with the Navy for possession of
Yes.
the
I
shipbuilder's model.
saw all of that in there, but
Right,
this
and
was
the same thing would happen there. They would establish an agreement, a loan agreement,
okay.
so to speak, with the new museum. The Navy would retain ownership of the shipbuilder's model.
Okay, because I had received a couple of phone calls about donating something that was worth a bunch of money to a private business that then next month they could turn around and sell it to Joe Blow and wherever.
It
And so,
remains Navy property.
yes, okay.
Bruce.
Thank you.
If you read the memo that came out on it, when the gentleman gave it to us, one of the promises he was assured was that it would never be moved. It would always have a permanent home in Casper. Now, of course, he's passed, and they got a couple letters from somebody at the Legion saying, oh, he would have loved it at this place. But, you know, it just takes me back to the Conwell Park when Dennis Laird was trying to rename that park after that family had gifted us this land. I take issue when somebody comes to the city and says, I'll give it to you, but you have to promise me it gets to stay there forever, and we say, okay, and then he dies and we just jerk it out and move it. That's kind of a problem for me. I don't know if it is for his family. I'd sure like to see a lot more research done with his family before we go and take a forever promise and move this thing against the wishes that were stated when he gave that to us. I agree with you that the museum in Du Bois would be a fantastic place, but that isn't what he wanted. It wasn't what was envisioned, and it wasn't what was promised to him.
Carter.
I can appreciate that, Mr. Mayor, Councilman. The fact is, he did not give it to us. The U.S. Navy loaned it to us, and the loan changes only in the sense that the U.S. Navy still owns it. The U.S. Navy understands where it's going, and they'll have an agreement as well that it be available for people to see and everything else. We tried to reach out to folks who originated this delivery, if you will, and ownership, so to speak. Loaning is really what it is. And we have not been able to get in touch with anybody that was around during the time that that whole thing took place. So we've tried to...
So the diligence has been done.
We've tried to, yeah, absolutely. And so that's why you see those letters in there from the local sort of stakeholders, because that was really the only group left that had any type of stake in this thing coming to Casper, this model. And so we really tried to make sure that that takes place so that nobody is offended or something is done that they didn't understand happened.
As a follow-up to that conversation, one of the phone calls that I received today was from a gentleman that had worked kind of with Stan, and that was his concerns that we were going to be giving it to somebody else because of the exact letter you were talking about. And that was why I asked the question about who retained ownership, excuse me, and the ability to be able to sell it or anything, because he actually thought as well that there was no place else in Wyoming really to put it except the event center. And when I told him that it was the property of the Navy and that there would be an agreement worked out there, he said, I think Stan would have loved this, to be able to go ahead, because of the things that were stated in the letter, that yes, it is covered up when we have big events and all of this, and he thought it would actually get, because of it being the National Museum, more display and more notoriety and everything by it being there. So
Well, and as a
that
follow-up,
eased my concern.
In fairness,
as well.
I've been to the event center hundreds of times and I've never seen that.
Right.
So, in fairness, is it going to be in a much better home? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we were honoring the man and his family. That's always been my concern. Sure. So,
Absolutely. And I really appreciated that call today, because that eased my concern about it as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor, Council Member. I did want to add one item that was not included in the memo, is that just last week I made contact with Kelly Ivanoff, and he's the District 7 Commissioner for the Wyoming Military Department Veterans Commission. And so I visited with him about it, and he also felt like it was a great plan for a new location. But he did say that he would take it back to his respective groups and make sure that there wasn't any feedback to the contrary. So we are doing everything we can and exhausting every avenue that we know of to ensure that the community is behind the move.
excellent.
And we of course want it to stay in Wyoming. It is the USS Wyoming. But this museum offers ample opportunity for people to be able to see it in a way that it's just not being recognized at the event center.
Amber.
Just want to add for anybody who hasn't been in that museum yet, that this is a world-class museum that's getting better and better and better as more things are added to it. And you know, as Bruce said, I think I've seen it up there, but I've never gone over to read it or look at what it was. And so I think putting it in front of, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many people are passing through that museum these days, but it's a lot of folks who are there specifically to see and learn about this type of thing would be a better use of what is a really incredibly cool piece of history. And I also, in the world of preservation, I don't know how old that piece is, but that museum will know what to do with it and will be able to take good care of it. So I feel better about it being there, both in terms of people getting to enjoy it and making sure that it is preserved.
Right. Steve.
As a question, and Salima may know, by it being a builder's model, and that ship was built back in the teens, and I'm talking about the 19s rather than that, was that model built in that time frame then?
Yes, my understanding.
That's
Mayor,
kind of
Council
what I had
Member,
interpreted.
is that
Yeah.
it was the actual shipbuilder's model used prior to the actual fabrication.
So
of
it's
it.
100 years old.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Amber. Oh,
And-
yeah, go ahead. Say
Sorry,
that.
I just
Hold on one
wanted to
second.
say, I invited Brad Murphy to come and he wasn't able to make it this evening, but I can tell you that, you know, his sentiment is for the preservation of the model and the growing concern, and when he learned the value, he was even more so like, we need to get it somewhere where it's safe, because they're not feeling real comfortable as the custodians of such a valuable piece of history, so.
Amber.
Have we started to explore the logistics of the move itself and the cost and who is handling that and all that?
Mayor, council member. Yes, so we have contacted several movers and located one that has a plan in place for crating the whole model within its case, transporting it with all of the insurance requirements to make sure that it's safe and preserved en route as well, and then we'll decrate it in the museum as they turn it over, so we have explored that.
If I remember right, it was like $3,650. It was really reasonable.
That was the exact figure.
I read it. I was pretty sure.
Nice fact check, bro.
Kyle.
Thanks. I'm in concurrence with all the things that have been said. It hasn't been mentioned yet, but it's in the memo. I don't believe we got a guarantee, but it sounds like there was a discussion that the folks at the museum even want to build a room dedicated to the USS Wyoming. This would be just one of the artifacts in there. So again, I think this move's appropriate. I think Mr. Lowe's intention of having it here was to make sure that it would have an audience, that people would be able to enjoy it and appreciate it. And I think that appreciation is going to be multiplied if we were to move it to the museum. You know, people go there to enjoy this type of history, as has been mentioned by other folks that have made many trips to the event center. It's more of a side note, shoved off in the corner up there. It sounds like at the museum it's going to get, you know, the tribute that many people believe it deserves. So I'm having a hard time finding any negatives about the move.
Anybody, anything else for Carter or Zulema? Okay, thank you. Thank you for all your work on this, guys. Appreciate it.
So are we thumbs up and giving the direction to move it then? or-
That'd be fantastic,
All right.
yeah.
Everybody okay with it? All right.
Thank you.
All right, parks watering discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is a follow-up item that we have had some discussion about before, and really what I think is probably best characterized as more of a status update in terms of this ongoing conversation. The original request was for us to try to understand what options might exist that would allow us to decrease our costs in terms of keeping our parks nice, particularly as it relates to irrigation. You all know that irrigation is just one component of keeping our parks nice. There's fertilization, there's weed abatement, but irrigation by far is the largest aspect of keeping our parks nice. We're lucky as a community to have as many parks as we do in special areas and so on. Anyway, there's a number of areas we'd like to kind of report to you on tonight, and there are a couple of areas that we need to come back to you as sort of a second and third phase, if you will, of this conversation. The items that we need to come back to you on are more in relation to bringing you sort of a proposal as it relates to areas that we would suggest being reduced or deturfed or those kinds of things. You probably read in the memo that we are working on that aspect of this project in concert with the Parks and Rec Board, formerly known as the Leisure Services Advisory Board. They've been just real helpful in providing us input, in reaching out to users and so on as this conversation matures and develops. The other thing that we would like to come back to you to discuss is with regard to strategies in terms of the way in which the general fund should be billed from a watering standpoint. We found that with other communities in this area, and I say this area, I mean sort of the Mountain West, that there are a number of considerations that council could look at and consider in terms of alternatives should you be interested. However, we'd like to do that closer to the time that we would discuss rates and whatnot versus right now, because A, we have a little more work to do, and B, as it relates to a proposal that potentially could impact rates, we think would be a more timely consideration. Tonight, however, we'd like to talk to you about the irrigation controls and the way in which we would implement that. You have given us very provisional direction with regard to that project, in that you have allowed the $600,000, if you will, to be included in the capital budget for fiscal year 23, recognizing that we would have more discussion on this possibility for nights like tonight. And then secondly, there's a couple opportunities we have from a raw water conversion, if you will, that I'd like Zulema to have you be aware of. So that would be the framing of the conversation for tonight. Recognizing that we would like to come back to you on a couple more occasions to talk about some other more expansive ideas. We would take your input, however, with regard to other things we may not have covered or thought about, or things you'd like to see more homework done on. And with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn some time over to Zulema and her team, that'd be really helpful.
Great. Zulema.
Mayor, Council, thank you. So as City Manager mentioned, this is a follow-up item, so I wanted to come back and give you all an update on some of the research that we've done. Again, as the City Manager noted, we've been working with the Leisure Services Advisory Board, soon to be the Parks and Rec Board, on some park conversion options that we'll be investigating even further throughout the next year. hopefully with some recommendations that we'll be bringing forward for consideration for capital in the FY24 budget, so around this time next year, regarding park conversions. And then, of course, the rate discussion that will hopefully come at the end of this year regarding what we're paying for water to irrigate our parks. But the primary discussion tonight will be regarding the irrigation control project, which is a significant capital investment, but one that we feel is definitely worthwhile in the savings that we'll see from sheer water and cost standpoint, but as well as from a labor and efficiency standpoint. So really we did some analysis. We worked very closely with the contractor, and by we I mean Randy and Jim are kind of team leads on this project, to identify the exact areas where we would need to put controllers as well as the moisture sensors and all of the other components that go along with the project. And we were able to break down the costs and the savings that we expect to see. And we did do a pilot project here at City Hall, and we're able to realize 19% savings in utilizing the controller and the moisture sensors. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to realize citywide. However, the vendor that provides these components say that really on average they see a 30% decrease in costs for watering when we implement their equipment. And so based on our analysis of the costs and the potential savings, we're looking at a return on investment of somewhere between 5 and 8 years, which we feel like is a pretty good return on investment for a project like this. And I would entertain any questions about that particular topic and invite Randy and Jim to give you more technical details if you have those questions.
Steve, Kathy, and then Al.
What's the life of the equipment?
Jim Gerhardt, that would be a wonderful question for you.
Well, we,
Because if you tell me it's a 4-year life and the payout's 8.
that's a good question, Councilman Mayor. Like most electronics, you're right, electronics do have a short lifespan. However, I can tell you that the current Motorola system that we are running is 25 years old, and it's still working.
Okay.
And we feel victorious in the fact that it's still working. And because it's 25 years old in this world of software that we have today, that we would expect, that we could get a little bit more out of it.
Okay.
So I would say realistically, at least 15 to 10 to 20 years on this new system. So, yeah.
Thank you.
A related question. Ongoing maintenance costs for them, I don't see anything about that projected in the cost. I'm wondering if that factored into the ROI calculation or if that's not much of a concern.
Mayor, council member, I was not told that it would be a significant investment in ongoing maintenance, but I'll let Jim speak to that as well.
Councilman Mayor, yes, the maintenance that we currently do with the Motorola system would be very similar with this system. In fact, it might be a little easier with this one, but I couldn't see any appreciable savings on that end of it. It's more of the actual just water savings.
Kyle.
Thanks, Mayor. I was really intrigued by the idea of repurposing some of these areas for arboretum. Is that how you say it? An arboretum? Or a tree nursery. I was curious, Jim, if you might be able to speak to what the benefit of that is for the city, for the community, to repurpose some of those areas for tree nurseries. What impact does that have with, the work city arborists do?
No, Councilman Mayor, arboretums and tree nurseries, I look at them as two different things. An arboretum to me would be more of an educational tool for the public, a place that we could showcase trees that live in our environment and that some people may not know do well here, and kind of use it as a sales floor, really, to push the value of trees. A tree nursery, like what you would say, would be beneficial on an aspect of everything like these days is expensive, and so even trees are affected by the inflation, especially delivery of fuel. So a tree nursery, we can make use of purchasing smaller stock, trees that we would want to plant later, and use these protected areas to grow them in the controlled environment. But later on, we could appreciate the value of them before we get them planted into a park.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you.
So the next item that we wanted to visit with you about in a little bit more detail is with regard to raw well water irrigation conversions. And so we do have several areas throughout the community that are currently irrigated through raw water, including our golf course and several parks throughout the community. But we see an opportunity to do just a little bit more with, a high rate of success, we believe. So, we could drill holes all over the city and maybe hit water that's reasonable for irrigation, but that's costly. And so we really tried to target areas where we felt like the chance of us getting into a well that's productive enough to irrigate was really high. And so we did identify Bryan Stock Trail Boulevards and Riverview Park as two potentials in that area as far as specific to parkland. In addition to that, we have raw water irrigation systems in very close vicinity to the Central Service Center on K Street, as well as to the water distribution garage close to the water treatment plant on Wyoming Boulevard. And so we feel like making connections into those existing irrigation systems and taking those city facilities off potable water for irrigation would be a good return on investment. So we're looking at the park returns being, in the case of the Bryan Stock Trail Boulevards, less than a year return on investment. And then in the case of Riverview Park, which is going to be a little more costly because of drilling the well, just under 5 years for a return on investment, but then we would never have to use potable water to irrigate that park again. So that would definitely be an ongoing savings for us. And then with the other facilities where we're just irrigating city building grounds, we're looking at just over a year for water distribution and well under a year for the central services facility as far as a return on investment. So we feel like with your approval, those would be a good capital dollars spent to save us in the long run.
Questions regarding this? Doesn't look like it. Awesome. Oh, yes.
I had a quickie. Are any of these raw water projects figured into this upcoming budget?
Mayor, Council, no, not specifically. Well, that's not true. So the baseline absolutely is the request was
620,
put.
yes.
Mhm.
No, I'm speaking of the raw water
No,
portion.
not specifically. However, we do request miscellaneous irrigation dollars every year, and 1 cent number 16 does have dedicated funds for miscellaneous irrigation improvements, and that's where these costs would come from.
Well, the reason I was asking is, you're talking about for central services and water distribution, you're looking at $5,000, and it pays out in 3/4 of a year. To me, that's a very good use of $5,000. That's why I was asking if, and I know that your whole write-up was talking about this particular part being a phase 3 a few years down the road, and I'm looking at that smaller figure there at the bottom of it almost, well, what it starts doing is you start saving $6,000 a year to go against the $44,000 you're gonna spend on the other two. So, in 3 years, you've paid half of the other project. So that's why I was asking.
Mayor, council member, thank you for that comment. So just to be clear, the numbering was purely coincidental. It's not
Okay.
suggested that that's necessarily the phasing. And in fact, I would say that we would like to move forward with the raw water conversion sooner than later so we could start realizing those savings, and the funding is available. If not now, which might actually be, then certainly July 1 when the budget is approved.
Any other questions or comments for Zulema and her team? Yeah, Amber.
I've just one question. We've got the money for the controls and monitors in the current budget, but it looks like we're still waiting on some information coming in from Parks and Rec Board about places that might be converted away from being grassy areas generally. So is there a concern that we would be purchasing control areas for areas that might go away once we've finished coming up with the kind of total plan with Parks and Rec?
Mayor, council member, that's a great question and a good point. We do have a planned implementation schedule that certainly prioritizes our larger turf areas and more popular parks before getting into some of these other areas. The parks that were recommended to the Leisure Services Advisory Board for consideration are parks that we know are underutilized because they have little amenity or they're in close proximity to parks that are utilized more regularly. And so they would definitely fall on the bottom of the priority list as we hash out some of the details with the Leisure Services Advisory Board.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Last call? Okay. Anything else, Susan?
I think so, thank you.
All right, so it sounds like a thumbs up for both. Carter, is that what you need from us tonight?
That'd be fantastic
Okay.
if
All
we
right.
can.
Is everybody okay with moving forward with this cost-saving measures? Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. We will be back again.
Thank you.
Thanks for the warning.
Coach Road.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, this too is a follow-up item pursuant to the deliberation you're currently involved in through the reading process, obviously, in your formal meetings. You have received the memo and the associated exhibits with regard to some of the history pertaining to the creation of this assessment and how we got to where we're at post-construction of the actual improvement. You probably recall and have reread that the reason we got here is because the neighbors in the area approached the city and approached the county commission and proposed a partnership that essentially was a three-way partnership between the same. And accordingly, pursuant to the public meetings that we had and the neighborhood discussions and so on, proposed the original assessment that was adopted in March a year ago, which gave us the green light to move forward with the construction, and here we are going through the final assessment roll. Your request was to, not only kind of catch us up with regard to what got us here, but potentially what other methodologies might be available to consider. And certainly Andrew can go through that with you in whatever detail you would prefer. I would remind you that if indeed you would like to adopt a different methodology, a different assessment, and those kinds of things, you would need to be mindful of the fact that any changes that we do will influence everybody's assessment that each property owner has been given to date. And so if we take away, for example, from one assessment, that means someone else's assessment needs to go up in order to accommodate that fluctuation in number, so that third can be covered as a part of the, covering the cost of the project. And that would be one thing that I would also remind you of. This methodology is not only inclusive of dividing this cost among the various acreages that are out there, but this is also a methodology that includes the involvement of two separate governments to make this project happen. And I'm here to tell you that is very abnormal as a methodology. You might have concern with the acreage and those kinds of things, but please don't forget that the methodology that's really being used is including two different governments into the cost of this project. And so that is a very unique methodology right there in and of itself. So my suggestion would be that if indeed you do want to alter the property owner's involvement in this, you may have to consider increasing what it is that the city of Casper's contributed which would be their equal third of this project, so that you aren't necessarily finding ourselves in an inequitable position with all the other property owners that are ready to pay their portion of the project. And I would tell you, I'm not a fan of having the city increase their contribution. That may not be much of a surprise coming from your manager, but I would say that if indeed you want to change a property owner's contribution in order to save that equity, that might be something you want to consider, assessing the city more. Okay? And with that, I'd turn the time over to Andrew, or questions, whatever you'd like to do.
Do you have questions before? Andrew? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
What is the staff's recommendation? Because my recollection of this is they brought this to us. Those landowners came to us and said, we want this done.
Right.
So we jump on board and we get it done, and now there's a couple of them that don't want to pay their share. So as far as I'm concerned, too bad. We live in a democracy. This is how it works. You guys brought it to us with the majority of the vote, and we did it. So now you got to pay your price. That's kind of where I'm at with it. Now I understand the equitable division, so what is staff's recommendation as far as this goes? Because I'm with you, Carter. They came to us, we made it happen for them, and now they don't want to pay. That doesn't work for me.
Can I ask my question before you answer his? Because mine goes along that same line. In those meetings, because I did not find it in here, but with the landowner, in the landowner meetings, did the landowners agree to divvy it up this way? Or was this something that staff did on their own? And if so, when did the landowners know about this? And along those same lines, I know that the letter was on here was sent out that any objections had to be done by February the 12th, and there was only one letter in there of all the letters that had a date on it. So that would be a recommendation I would like to make as well to staff, is when they receive these letters, if they're not dated, to put a date stamp on them so that we know they made deadlines or whatever. But there was only one of those letters that made the February 12th deadline. So I'm interested in when and how the landowners agreed, or if they did to the
So do you want to
assessment.
intertwine both those questions?
I do.
That's why I wanted to ask
Yeah.
mine first.
No problem at all. And actually, then I would like to defer to Andrew for additional detail if I could. But the basic answer is, as far as staff's recommendation goes, we would really like you to adopt the ordinance as proposed, with the methodologies associated with the assessment role that we've identified. And the reason I feel good about that is because, just like you said, Councilman, we were brought into this conversation at the invitation of the neighbors in the area. Secondly, Andrew's team did a really good job of being extremely transparent from the very, very beginning, involving neighbors that would show up in the conversation, talking through different methodologies, having a lot of give and take. I think his team did a really good job of trying to be as inclusive in the conversation, the development of the ordinances and so on, putting the project together from the very beginning. And so with that, I feel really good about what it is that we proposed, even though we have gotten some objections, and that's not unusual either. And so with that, could I turn
Absolutely.
to Andrew to add any other details?
Andrew? Mayor, Councilman, excuse me, it's hard to believe that this process started almost 2 years ago now. But Carter's right, this came to us from the residents out there asking for us to pave Coach Road. It doesn't include any curb and gutter, no sidewalk, no street lights, it's just blacktop. So even now, if you go out there, you go, it doesn't look like a city street. But it is a city street, but it's simply paved. So they came to us in July of 2020, I think. We held a public meeting in November of that same year, invited everybody, sent out notices, telling them, hey, we're going to talk about the local assessment district. And Fleur, can you zoom out just a little bit on this map? Can you go?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the mouse.
Oh.
The cat got it.
There we go. Oops.
So we sent out a very similar map to this. It's in your package, I think, showing where the LED boundary is, which was this. It included these properties here, it did not include this property, but it included, so it was that shape right there. And we sent out notices to every one of those property owners, first class mail, including an assessment, an estimated assessment cost, including what we thought your assessment would be based off the allocation, which was per acre. So that was discussed with that group at that meeting in November of 2020. I think 9 of the 18 property owners showed up. And probably everybody with the green dot you see here were probably the 9 that they were in favor, so they showed up. We presented that back to council. We actually passed, the council passed a resolution of intent to create the ordinance. So that resolution, along with the LAD map, along with the proposed assessment, was again sent out to all the property owners impacted by the LAD. And council did get 3 letters of opposition based on that notification process. 2 have complained again, and 2 at that time specifically mentioned they thought the Acre assessment was not fair. Council heard that, proceeded to adopt ordinance, the ordinance LAD 158. We finished the design, led it to bid. Trado finished the contract in July of 21. We've now got all the costs established. We've got final costs in. It came in at 147, I think, less than the 185 roughly that we initially thought. So the assessments went down. You've now passed, you've had 2 readings now of the ordinance. 3rd and final reading is next week. But so I think the public or the residents out here have had ample opportunity to know the boundary, to know the cost, and to know the assessment methodology.
So I saw Bruce first.
As a follow-up, lest we not forget, although they're being assessed for this, their property values just jumped immensely. They came to us because of dust abatement and all of the harassments that were taken from that dirt and gravel road in their neighborhood, which has been abated now. So their property's now more valuable. I mean, it's gonna be pretty hard for them to come back now after we've already done all the work and say, well, no, we don't want it. Well, too late. And your property's worth a lot more money now. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's done, it's been done. So.
I should probably talk about a typical assessment method would be based on the frontage that you have on the road. You know, so if this is 100 feet long and you've got 50 feet of that 100 feet, you're going to assess half of that cost. It doesn't make sense. You got that property owner, that property owner, that property owner, and these 4 property owners with 0 frontage onto Coach Road, which is what we control. We can't pave private easements or private access drives. So then there really 2 options left. You can do a per lot basis. That guy gets, they all get assessed equally, no matter what the size, or you get per acre size. It was selected at per acreage is probably more representative of a linear footage. But you can argue either way which one's fairer. There's no fair. If I live right here, I could argue, why do I need to pay for the rest of this road? You can make arguments on both sides.
Kyle, and then Steve Cathy, and then Amber.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks, Andrew. You essentially said most of what I was going to say in the sense that regardless of the methodology that we used per acreage in this one. A couple folks took issue with that because they had the largest share of acreage. But if we were to do per lot, then the folks with the smaller amount of acreage would say, why am I paying as much as the folks that get a lot more benefit from it? And if we did the frontage, then the folks that wouldn't be assessed at all, there could be criticism that, hey, they're not paying for any, even though they benefit. So no methodology is perfect. Somebody's kind of drawn the short straw as far as that goes. I do, though, empathize with Mr. Corson, who he was the individual that came to speak to us. He sent us a letter. I appreciated the time and effort he put into the letter and taking the time to come speak to us. I believe his situation was that he had purchased property in the area during the process of these stakeholder and property owner meetings, and I think he even acknowledged to us that he knew they were going on but wasn't paying real close attention or didn't really take the initiative to attend them. But my understanding is that also very recently, city staff became aware of another individual in the area who had purchased property through an estate sale. You know, somebody sold their estate, they purchased a property, they weren't aware any of this was going on. No realtors had told them or anything. And then, you know, we're coming up to them after the fact saying, oh, by the way, you owe this amount of money. And so I agree with the city manager that I don't think we should set a precedent that the city will be the one to take it in the shorts anytime anyone complains about the methodology being unfair, because it's unfair. You know, that's all a matter of perspective. So I agree with that. However, I would like to see what we can do as a council to prevent folks like Mr. Corson and whoever the other individual was that ended up in a similar position, how to prevent that in the future, where if these sorts of deliberations are occurring or have occurred, somebody who's buying property after the fact is made aware. You know, I don't know if that was intentional on the part of the realtors or whoever might have been engaged in those property, you know, transactions, but it is, yeah, it wasn't either of you two, is it?
No, but isn't that what a title company's for?
Exactly.
So if there's any action council can take to prevent folks, you know, having to grapple with this after they've already purchased property, not being aware of these, you know, encumbrances, I'd like to see what we can do as far as that goes. But I agree with the city manager. I don't think the city should be discounting it, because that's setting a precedent that anytime anybody thinks something's unfair, the city will pick up the tab, and I just don't think I think it's a dangerous precedent.
Do you guys have anything you want to say? Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Mayor, Council, I can add one thing. It is a local assessment district that gives them the opportunity to pay off their assessment over the course of 10 years, I think at 3% interest. So I realize that, you know, for some people, for a lot of people, a $4,000 assessment is a lot of money, but we do try and soften that blow over the course of 10 years at a relatively low interest rate.
Thank you.
Steve Cap.
So my original question, or one of them, was about, they were informed of the methodology by what I reread. They were informed of the methodology, how it was done, and what their assessments were going to be in January of 21, and they had until February 12th to oppose that. And what I am seeing is, in reading these letters, the three that we got before the 12th deadline all had to do with even assessing them. It had nothing to do with acreage. It had nothing to do with number of participants or anything else. So none of their objections to meet that deadline had anything to do with the methodology. So I would then again have to agree, once I understood that they had all of that information prior to that deadline, I would have to agree with the city manager, with Kyle, and with Bruce. I think they knew it, they had their opportunity, and now they want to turn around even after the fact on second reading and whine that we ought to be dividing it by 18 rather than by acreage. Yeah.
And where can I get Lisa real quick?
I'm actually
You're out.
retract my.
Okay. Lisa, go ahead.
So as a realtor, I'm going to explain how all of this happens and how realtors don't know about it. For starters, the city council must make this law. And so this is not even on the ordinances yet. We still have a final reading to go to. So once it becomes law, then it's recorded with the courthouse, which then the title company can then pull your deed, and then it would come out on the title saying that you've got a special assessment. Once it's law and it goes to the courthouse, it is then assessed on your tax assessment. So when you're mailed out that assessment, or if you go to natrona.net, you can see what your special assessment is. These people can either pay yearly or they can pay it all out at once. So realtors wouldn't necessarily know that this is even a thing. The sellers, however, would. So it'd be up to the sellers to disclose that this is coming down or that this is happening. But if the sellers aren't sure what's happening or whatever, and they didn't disclose, so you have an estate, so you have somebody who's passed away, obviously they didn't disclose that this was something that was happening. So it really becomes a situation to where sellers must disclose, because we have not yet made this an ordinance. So it's not even recorded at the courthouse yet for the title company to even be able to pull it.
Okay, I appreciate that.
So I asked the city manager if there's anything we can do to.
Still thinking.
I
There's got to be
know
a
you'll
solution somewhere.
Well, this is where I was going, Kyle. Is there a way that we can remedy that? Is there a way that we could deal with that? That's my slight conversation I was having with Carter. So.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the other thing I would add to this as we sort of deliberate that question is we also advertise all of these elements as broadly as we can, so that if there is someone who's kind of a new property owner and so on, they they have the opportunity to see what this means for their neighborhood. And so if those kinds of things are sort of lagging in terms of informing buyers and those kinds of things, without a doubt, we take a lot of measures to try to inform the public, inform the neighborhood, and so on. We certified mail in a lot of instances and so forth. It's really hard to try to find a solution that covers every possible variable of someone not being informed. And that's the case with anything we do as government. You know, it's just really hard to have that policy to be sure and guarantee that every human is informed with regard to what's going on in their neighborhood or in their community or whatever. So I'm not sure I've got a good answer, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Steve?
Well, just to piggyback on what Lisa's saying, I mean, this has not been passed on the final reading yet, so it doesn't really exist until that happens, so buyer beware. I mean, there's no way of really knowing that this is there until it's there. So anything could happen. You could buy a house today in some neighborhood and tomorrow something that you were unaware of could happen. So they got to do their own research to make sure that there's nothing like this coming up. And I really don't know how you would inform people without putting a big sign, hey, if you're going to buy in this neighborhood, you got to wait, next 3 weeks you could be assessed something. I mean, that would be ridiculous. So.
Amber?
So that made me think of another question. Is it typical that the work would already be done, as it is in this case, before all of that in ordinance is finalized? Is that typically how the process works?
Mr. Mayor, council member, it is pretty typical. What would be less typical is if we had moved forward with something like this without going through, the neighborhood involvement process, sending around the certified mail and the petitions and so on, so that everybody is aware of the process we're taking. That would be very unusual. But the ordinance process that we're pursuing is all statutorily driven.
Well, the other cool thing that we did was, by having the work done, is we saved that neighborhood $45,000. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
We came in, right, Andrew?
Times two,
Yeah.
actually.
Right.
Does the county too?
Right.
Yeah, and one reason for doing that effect, we don't know what the final costs are until all the costs have been identified. We estimated the cost initially at $200,000.
Right.
Then we went in with a finer look at it, what came down to 185, and then when it actually went out to bid, and it came out at 145. So,
Steve?
Carter, to what Amber's saying though, could we not reverse it a little bit to where all this is done up front and then the work gets done, and if it comes in under budget, you're assessing them over a period of time anyways. So if that assessment is X amount of dollars, but then we come in under budget, you just decrease the assessment over the next 9 years or whatever is left on it to where it comes out and pays for the project. But at least then this is all done up front. Nobody can come back after the fact when it's finished and complain about it. You know what you're being assessed.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, if I'm hearing you correctly, I think we do, because the first assessment that we go through is actually a council decision as well. And so before we even start construction, we go through a process that the council approves the assessment as we understand it at that point in time. And when we come back the second time, it's because our assessment went lower than what we originally assessed. And so there's really 2 bites at the apple here for the participants, because they are going through a public process before we lay a shovel in the ground, and now we're going through another public process because the assessment happened to be lower.
But if I could follow up, I guess what I'm saying though is we're talking about, now we have people that are complaining because of the methodology used. So what I'm saying is hammer all that out so that the methodology is we're gonna do it by acre. And if they're like, no, that's not the way it should be by lot. That's hammered out before you can put a shovel in the ground. If you get 9 out of 18 people that say, hey, I don't like the way this is going, you can't agree upon it, okay, then we're just not gonna do it. You know, we'll move
Have your
on
dirt
and
road,
we're not
yeah.
spending the money.
Yeah.
And fighting about it later.
And see, if I understood the process, that's what was done with that January letter that went out that gave them till February 12th to complain, and then we passed the ordinance that, wasn't it an ordinance or was it? We passed an ordinance then that said, we're building it, this will be your assessment as it stands now. However, that ordinance was not recorded. And that's what we need to figure out, is how to get that pre-construction ordinance recorded so that the title companies can find it. And then come back with an amendment to the ordinance like we would be doing now.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I guess, but if we've gone through this, then why are we here talking about it today? That's my point.
Well,
If
and
we've already
basically
gone
that's-
through the process and said, this is the way it's gonna be, we've had the meetings, you knew what it was gonna be, then why are we even entertaining this discussion right now?
Because somebody complained.
Well,
And that happens a lot.
Carter, do you want to say anything before I go to the council?
I think we are at that point. We don't understand why we're here, because
the
And I'm not-
answer's on the
Where
ceiling,
are
but
we?
I've been
everybody
saying that for almost 8 years.
no, I'm just saying, in our opinion, the costs were communicated, the public approved. We brought those costs forward to your predecessors, that was approved. We've tried to be communicative all the way through. Again, we went through that broad publication discussion. Andrew, unless I'm totally misspeaking, do you agree with that?
Carter, Mayor, Council, absolutely do. And I think I told you that I think you had 3 objections, and I think it totaled 30-some%. They can kill it if it's 50% or more. The neighborhood can kill an LAD if
From the beginning.
From the very beginning, if over half of them say, we're not on board. So that's why I threw in that percentage of, it was maybe a third that objected, but the rest of them were in favor.
Jai, do you have anything? I know you've been going back and forth.
I don't know, my brain's kind of hurting from this. So I guess I'm confused about, I don't know, I feel like this could be a whole rabbit hole. But the resolution that was passed, I mean, resolution number 21-8, I mean, it says right in there, the estimated assessable costs for each acre of property are as follows: $1,575.83 per acre. So that's not recorded with the title?
Not until we
We haven't
finalize
passed
it.
it.
Not
Yeah.
until this,
Next
okay,
week.
Next Tuesday.
okay.
And then it's going to be recorded at the courthouse first.
Okay, so that goes
Then
on
the
the
title
second
will,
time
when they
around.
pull the title commitment, then they
search.
get it from the courthouse.
These people are already aware, right?
Yeah.
The only
Well-
one that potentially would have a complaint was the one that wound up getting the property due to the death in the assessment. But otherwise, the rest of them, to me, had no complaint at all. And that was why I was asking if there was a way to get that ordinance that Jai just read recorded at the
Yeah,
courthouse, so that then in the construction period and everything, the title companies can go there and find it, and it would have shown up on that title. That was the only thing I was asking about.
So I've got people that are waiting, so please make sure to raise your hand and wait for me to call on you, so we can just keep it in order. Thank you. Amber?
What, Was it a resolution or an ordinance that we already passed, or both?
Andrew, do you want to address that?
You currently passed a resolution, notice of intent to create LID. You have passed ordinance LID 158, authorizing the construction. So you passed a resolution and you passed an ordinance. You are now passing the assessment ordinance to assess the property owners.
Follow up. If the value of the construction came in at exactly the cost that we had originally passed in our ordinance, we would still need to go through this ordinance to like activate the assessment, basically, right? Because that happens after the construction is done.
Mayor, Councilmember, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's my question. I do have one comment. I think the thing that kind of has rubbed me a little bit wrong about this from the beginning, the folks we were hearing from are the people who are paying the most, which is not surprising. But I think the thing that's a little maybe doesn't align super well is that each lot gets one vote. They don't get to vote based on their acreage, but they're being assessed based on their acreage. So because we see so much discrepancy in the lot sizes, of course the people who are paying $200 are like not gonna, so it's easy to make up 50% of the neighborhood because of how many small lots you have of people paying $200. So then you got all of these people who were the ones who were complaining paying $5,000 who get strung along with the crew because they're getting assessed based on their acreage, but they're not getting more of a say based on their acreage. So I think that's maybe where a little bit of tension is, and I agree with Kyle that there's no perfect assessment model, and I also agree like we're already done, so that's how it is. But I do understand, and it had me a little bit scratching my head at the beginning where it's like, okay, 30% of the land being represented is maybe not in favor, but it's more than that of the cost of the people who are bearing more of the cost who are not in favor, maybe more than 50%. I don't know. I didn't do the math, but and maybe that's why folks are feeling that it's unfair, because there are not enough of them paying enough to raise us think about it to get it overturned, because there's so many people paying $200, $250. So anyway, I'll just say that, but I think it's done. So I think we just have to keep on moving.
So Kyle, I had your hand up for a while. Did you have something to say? Then I'm going to come over to this side.
Thanks, Mayor. No, essentially, as sort of a follow-up to what Steve's question was, if that's the issue with the title companies, is that we have to codify the assessment ordinance before the county clerk has the information needed for title companies to be able to pull it from. I'm probably butchering this, so you got to stand up. You got to walk away from the table because I'm like totally misrepresenting the industry. If that's the issue, is that this information doesn't get to the county clerk in a timely enough manner. I guess the issue I have is that there's too big of a window for property to switch hands. I would love to see whatever we can do to reduce that lag time. If that's, the county clerk, because we've already done the work. We did the work last year, so there's nothing, all last year there was nothing anyone could have done to stop it from happening. It was going. And so I guess I don't understand why the county clerk's office couldn't use our initial resolution and or ordinance that we passed. Use that information for title companies. Why do they have to wait for the assessment ordinance after the work's already been done and stuff? Because that's my question. I'll just cut off there. I don't know if we have an answer to that question tonight, but I'd love an answer at some point, because if we could do anything to codify the county clerk being able to use our initial ordinance at the start of this project for realtors going forward, I'd love to explore that option. Thank you.
Okay. You want to think about that?
Yep, sure. Absolutely.
All right. Bruce and then Steve.
I guess the other question I would have, I don't want to get into how they chose the acreage thing, but Amber brought up a good point. Let's say Bruce Snell buys 50 acres of land, and I sell each one of you an acre, and I keep 40 for myself, and I build this nice big place on 40 acres, and each one of you have an acre. And you guys come in and decide you want to pave that road all the way through there. Well, guess who's on the hook for all the money? Because you guys outnumber me with your 1 acre, even though I own 40 acres. So how does that work to bring fairness to the big guys like in this picture? I guess my question would be, Andrew, shouldn't the people with the bigger acreage be allotted, like you get one vote per acre in order to bring that into balance? Wouldn't that be more fair?
Mayor, you can defeat an LED if more than 50% of the area of the LED opposes it.
The acreage.
Yes, it's not per vote,
Okay.
Oh, okay.
all right?
Great.
So they just didn't speak up early enough as,
They don't
They
represent
don't
more than
50%.
half of the assessed area.
gotcha.
So if you have 90% of the area and you oppose it, it won't happen.
Okay, understood.
Good.
Understood.
It's not that you and 5 other people and it's by area.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Thank you.
So, Steve Friel.
Well, I guess just to come back to what Kyle's saying, you can't assess somebody something that's not there. And so we have to finish this process in order to put that assessment into place. So there's no way title companies or the assessors are gonna know about it until after we actually get this done. You can't charge somebody something that we haven't agreed to charge them yet. But I think my other question would come back to you. I mean, most of these projects that we do, there's a sign that usually goes up that says paid with 1 cent tax or whatever it might be, and those signs seem to always stay there even after the project's done for a period of time. Why could we not put a sign, like in this situation, you got this road being paved, why could you not put up a sign out there saying this improvement project is being paid by an LAD? And put on there, each of these homeowners are being assessed. That way, anybody going to the neighborhood and sees a for sale sign is gonna be like, oh, I'd like to buy that house, but this is saying that I'm gonna end up having to pay for this road at the same time. At least they're informed that way. You're not waiting for it to get to the county and work its way through the process. They would know prior to buying that house that they probably are gonna end up paying extra money.
That's a great idea.
I think that's a good idea.
Amber and then Jay.
I just had a correction. I was just saying that I was reading this chart wrong. That a lot of these people are paying $200 and they're not. It's 2,000 is sort of the lower end of things. So that's all.
Jay and then Steve Kathy.
And just a minor point, but one of the largest lots, I mean, one of the 3 complaints that we have is from Lot 3, which was a signatory to the initial request for the LAD. And so I think it's worth pointing that out, that they were in from the beginning, although part of the objection is that COVID happened and they had a huge financial loss through that time period. And so I have empathy for them that their financial circumstances shifted over time and nobody could predict that. And so I don't know that I'm advocating for anything, but I think, you know, the real world happened and maybe that changed, but they were part of the initial crew that asked for it. So it's worth taking that into consideration.
Steve Kathy.
The only thing that I was gonna bring up is that basically what we're really talking about here is just like the guy that owns the corner lot. He gets assessed for both frontages, even regardless. And so all of his neighbors are paying, if he's got a 120 by 120, he's paying 240, while all of his neighbors down the street are paying 120. It's just one of those things that happens. And corner lot owners need to be aware of that as well when they buy their corner lot. But I would venture to say that 80% of them don't know and understand that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
Same situation.
Well, I mean, to your point, and I guess on the thread about whether or not this, you know, information can be shared earlier in the process so that it's not all on the buyer to figure out or understand what's happening. I mean, we don't know the assessed value, but is there still a flag or something that can, like, is there a process that
His
could be?
idea, that's how it's.
Well, talking about a physical signpost, but I'm talking procedurally, like if once we pass this resolution, I mean, can there be a flag put on whatever paperwork process is in place once we pass the assessment that's like flag, you know, this property will be assessed down the line, or there's an ongoing project that will affect this property, so that at least there's something that indicates to the title company, even if you don't have the exact value, there's a process in play here and you might want to ask questions before.
Steve and then Lisa.
Once this is put into place, though, then it's filed, and the process is pretty quick after. Actually, once it's filed, the title companies, they do their searches over there. so they'll know in real short order. I mean, there's not gonna be a big lag. I think the big thing right now is it hasn't been passed, so nobody's gonna know about it, nobody's gonna see it until we finish doing our thing, and then I would venture to say, I mean, relatively quick, within a week, it'll definitely, whatever it takes to file it is the time frame.
Can I
Yeah,
just
go ahead,
follow
Jack.
up? So I might be completely not understanding the process, but I'm not speaking about this ordinance that we're talking about now. I'm talking about the resolution that was passed in early '21, like that, or whenever the LAD is passed, at some point earlier, way early in the process to flag it so that we're not coming back to this conversation.
I've got the answer for
Yeah,
that.
okay, go ahead, Lisa.
So there's multiple times that this whole thing can fall apart. So if you prematurely flag things and it falls apart, then you're having to undo it all. So it doesn't make sense to do it that way. And so we have to have all the numbers, you have to have the bids, you have to have everything in place before you're flagging any kind of properties. So we didn't even have the actual cost, which is what we're trying to pass now. So to me, I don't think it's reasonable at the very beginning to start flagging properties when council could literally just not pass. Or if you had the neighborhood decide to come up and say, we changed our mind, I mean, this could fall apart in multiple different ways. So to me, I don't see how that would be, I think that would be too premature.
Steve.
But if I understand what you're saying, Jai, is that when we know that we're gonna go out there and put a shovel in the ground, then is there a way that we can flag that in the system, or flag it somehow to where somebody knows, or even title companies would be able to go back and look at it and say, okay, here's what you need to worry about, but there is a potential assessment coming, we don't know how much it's gonna be, but they are putting this road in, the homeowner's gonna have to pay for it, we just don't know a dollar figure yet. At least they can make an informed decision off of that.
Sure.
I agree.
That was kind of where I
In
was
complete
coming
agreement
from.
with that idea, that's where I was trying to go, is I get that we don't know the exact costs and stuff until this point when we codify the assessment, but at some point last year, we had cemented the fact this was gonna happen. It was either the moment the shovel hit the ground or weeks or months before that, but there's been an 8-month at least window where we knew this was gonna happen. And so I'm in total agreement with that. If there's something we can do procedurally to flag it when, at the point, whether it's shovel hitting the ground or as early as possible, that it is cemented, nothing the homeowners or the property owners in the area can do, it's moving forward, the train has left the station. At that point, I would love to see something procedurally happen so that folks can, just so that we're doing as much as we can to fully inform buyers, that something like this is in the works, so.
Carter.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I think you've given some really good insights here and identified a potential weakness in the process. I feel like the direction I'm hearing is that when we do get to that first ordinance passage, which is prior to the construction, but definitely a passage of an ordinance, I think that gives us the opportunity to at least sign the area so that people know, hey, this is an LAD project. I don't think, however, that gives us the authority to go over there to the county assessor's office or the clerk's office or whatever and say, okay, you got to do this, because they're a totally separate government entity that we have no influence over or authority. And so they're going to do what they got to do, what they think the statutory requirements are, and that's our problem. We just don't have that authority to mandate something happening at their level. But at the very least, I like the direction that you've proposed so far, and I think that's easy for us to incorporate.
Steve and then Bruce.
I just have a question.
Carter, could we at least have that discussion with the assessor and let them know that we're not coming over and saying, you have to put this on there and you have to figure out what the amount's gonna be. But I think that if we can have that conversation of saying, hey, we know we're gonna build it. We're gonna start building it next week, and we're putting a sign up letting everybody know it's getting built, and the LAD's taking care of it, to at least do something with each of those properties that are gonna be responsible for it, to at least somewhere put down that there is going to be an assessment to that property. We don't know how much, We don't know when it's gonna pass and be finalized, but there's an assessment, so people are forewarned if there's a change of ownership, at least the new owners coming on know that that's out there.
Bruce?
Would it be fair, and I know you realtors have enough on your plate, but I've signed enough papers with you to know that there's disclosures that have to be made by sellers, and how hard would it be to put something in that contract that says, and if there's a pending LED or anything coming up, that the seller has to disclose that to his prospective buyer? How hard would that be to put in a contract and put the responsibility where it truly belongs on the seller?
But there are disclosures in there, and a lot of times they'll sign them anyways, and you're not gonna get they're not gonna fully disclose things, so it's not gonna change anything, and then you gotta turn around after the fact. If you find out about it, you gotta prove that they knew it, you know, which can be, we can all sit there and say they knew it, but to be actually able to prove it is a different thing.
Sure.
Got
This is to the two of them. Where does the title company go to search the title? Is it the clerk's office?
Courthouse, yeah.
Courthouse.
Okay, not the assessor's office, but the clerk's office, the courthouse.
Mhm.
So basically, it could be recorded at the clerk's office, but stayed on there pending final construction costs in the ordinance, so that then it is tied to, because it is an ordinance. Because, yeah, we're looking from August of last year when we passed the ordinance, so that could be a possibility that we start recording those initial ordinances that authorize the construction. Because that is actually setting in motion the final assessment. But I like Steve's idea too, of put up a 1 cent sign, only it doesn't say 1 cent, and go from there, because yeah, like you said, anybody that drives it, if they can read.
So Carter, it sounds like that the council's in agreement that, you know, the support that, hey, nothing's gonna happen here with codes. So it sounds like, am I correct in that? So I feel like that's on, but it sounds like what we're looking at is maybe direction, or giving direction to the city staff to say, hey, are there possibilities of how we can remedy the situation of bringing the attention to the situation, how we can do that? Is that something you guys can look into, and some of the suggestions that were brought up?
The answer is yes, for sure. I'm struggling, as you can tell, because I'm not sure how to make it more apparent and readily available that we're going down this road, given the pains that you all go through to be transparent every time you pass an ordinance. You have 3 public hearings, basically, with each time you read, which is abnormal for city councils in Wyoming. And I don't mean abnormal as a bad thing, I mean abnormal as a extraordinary thing. The county clerk, I would think, kind of watches these things to be aware of what their government is doing, because they aren't a city employee, they certainly are our county elected officer. We have minutes that you produce. You actually produce the words of the ordinance, which is very expensive for you to do. You are very, very good about being transparent and open to nearly a fault with regard to the detail that you provide your public. I think the only thing that would be left to do, aside from the sign thing, which makes a lot of sense to me, is requiring Fleur here to go have a face-to-face meeting with the county clerk saying, hey, we passed an ordinance that you might want to be aware of. It's up to you what you do with it, you know? And then we can do that. I'm not saying that is inappropriate by any means. But, you know, I mean, it's another extraordinary measure that you would be taking that, you know, may have limited value. I don't know, you know. I'm trying to compliment you with regard to the work that you do to keep your to keep your community informed. You do an outstanding job in that regard.
Steve?
Carter, would it be, like, out of our position to potentially, like, for both of us, I mean, could we maybe have a discussion with a local title company, the people that actually do the research, and say, hey, how can, do you see something that we're not talking about at this table of how, when these things start, that we can put something in place to where they'll pick it up? And what does that look like? What's the easiest avenue to do that? And maybe it's something we're not thinking about here, that maybe something real simple that we could bring back to you and say, hey, if you did this, they would find it with, you know, in the very beginning, and then at least people, they can put it on a title commitment and know that, hey, I've got a special assessment out there, even though we don't know what the cost is, but.
Right.
I mean,
I
is
think
that
it's
all
a
right
great
if we
idea.
do that?
Oh, heck yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. There may be something out there. Yeah.
Okay.
Steve?
Oh, I was gonna say along those lines, it may be nothing more than emailing the title companies a copy of the ordinance, and here's the ordinance, this is what's happening, you need to be aware of it. It could be that simple
That's
as
a
well.
good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, I mean,
Because there's only 4 of them, so.
it wouldn't be hard.
So council, we're good with codes?
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously, we beat that to the
I
ground.
appreciate that, yeah. Thank you.
Also, we know that Carter thinks we're great.
I do.
With our job, which is
Fantastic.
fantastic.
To a fault.
To a fault, apparently.
Almost, I said, almost.
But Carter, it sounds like we do have a couple things that maybe you guys can look into.
Yeah,
To
you
help
bet.
out a little bit. That would be great.
Absolutely.
I think we'll move forward with that. Is everybody okay with all that? Okay. Thank you, Carter. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Andrew.
Thank all of you. I appreciate it.
Unfortunately, we got into the weeds on that. And they were tall.
Oh,
Are you
yeah.
moving on?
Yes,
to
we're
the
gonna
next
go into
item?
the open container.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave that.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for reminding me.
Well, let me,
Oh, it was you. Sorry.
let me ask a question. Do we want to go ahead and skip the open container temporarily and finish up the rest of it? That way Amber could go ahead and leave.
Well, there's still an hour.
Yeah.
Do what?
We still
Yeah.
got an
I don't
hour.
think this is gonna take long, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, just,
It's probably gonna be in 2 hours on this now. No, it shouldn't take too long. All right, open container area.
we're 10 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you all know, we've been working on the resolution that we will be bringing to all of you to adopt this year's open container program, open it up basically. And as you can see on the screen here, that generally runs between Memorial Day and Labor Day. You've already had a discussion giving us some guidance and feedback and those kinds of things pursuant to what you see here. And this is the current proposal. In the meantime, since the time that we've been working on the resolution, preparing it for your formal adoption, we have gotten a letter suggesting that the open container area be amended to go beyond what you see here to include additional area as demonstrated with this next exhibit. Wait for it. Is this it? Okay. That expands the open container area with regard to a few adjustments. One of the more notable adjustments that you will probably pick up on here pretty quickly is the one green line that the cursor is on right now that extends across Collins there to the south, which would indicate that those who have open containers, if this amended boundary were to be adopted, would then be allowed, if you will, as a term, to cross Collins with that open container and extend into the businesses that are on the other side of Collins, the south side of Collins. Furthermore, the other extension or amendment would include going north. Am I reading that right? Yeah, thank you. Going north, I can't quite tell how far that is. All the way up to First, thank you. Okay. As well, to help the businesses there, the likes of which do not have liquor licenses that I'm aware of. Is that right, Fleur?
Correct.
Okay. And so it would allow for
License. I'm sorry.
no, that do not have licenses available. And so, you know, there wouldn't really be business access and therefore alcohol vending opportunity, if you will, on that extent of the amendment, if you will, amended area. And so those are a couple notable changes I would have you consider as you think about this. But if I could, Mr. Mayor, turn some time over to Fleur to walk us through some of the other nuances of this, I'd appreciate it.
Go ahead, Fleur.
Your Honor, members of council. So yes, as City Manager mentioned, the north side of Center going up to First Street, there are no liquor license holders or establishments that can actually participate. You have to be a retail liquor license holder or a brewery or a distillery in order to serve alcohol for off-site consumption. So while there's Don Juan's restaurant over there, they wouldn't be able to participate. And a lot of the other establishments in that area are stores, retail stores, that close in the evening. So there isn't a lot of business or activity in that area. So that was one area we weren't sure if you wanted to extend to. And then City Manager mentioned going south all the way down.
Are you done, Fleur?
Sure.
Oh, no,
I just saw a hand, so
No. Keep going, because I've got Friel and I've got.
I have a question for you.
The other, they also removed the OYD area, going all the way to Yellowstone Garage. Since Yellowstone Garage is now closed, they thought that they should remove that area. However, we've heard that Rock the Block may still continue, and it may continue with that, and so we did not remove that from ours, and so that's why you see this is kind of shortened in that one area.
Fleur,
Now
I'm
I
sorry,
am
Bruce
done.
did have a question for you.
Whose idea was it to extend up First Street if there's no businesses that are even actually open at that time of night?
Your Honor, members of council, it was the DCBA.
Okay.
So there are retail stores that are over there that thought that they might benefit from it, but I don't think they understood the time that it starts at 5, which is when most of them are closed, and I don't think they understood that Don Juan's can't participate. And so Don Juan didn't actually ask to be included, they just thought they would be nice and ask for him, is my understanding of it.
Friel?
Was Carter done or?
I'm done, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
he is, yeah.
So just a couple comments. First of all, you know, when we first talked about doing this, the idea was to be the core of downtown itself, David Street Station, and that's where it was at. This map shows me that we are extending, first of all, extending up makes no sense. I can see if businesses were open, maybe, but there's no alcohol establishments north that it's gonna benefit. We're crossing over Collins, a busy street, so we can pick up one bar. But then if you look over on Walcott Street, we actually stop at Walcott Midwest, but if you went a half a block further, occasions by Corey's there, and we're not picking them up. But then we're picking up the office. So you can't accommodate every bar downtown. So in my opinion, I think extending this beyond what we already have is not a good idea. You're not gonna please everybody, and it was meant for the core downtown. So I personally think it should stay there. I certainly don't like the idea of crossing over Collins Street to pick up one alcohol establishment when you have that busy of a street too. So that's my 2 cents, but I think we're just extending this to try and make a couple people happy, but you've got some you haven't even addressed, so I would say stick to it the way it was.
Bruce?
I agree with that. The only variance I might have is, because I'm having a hard time reading where these are at, and I do think we need to make sure that the Yellowstone Garage is still included in that area, because they are going through with Rock the Block, and there will be 3,000-4,000 people down there on Wednesday and Thursday nights, and I think it's important that that aspect of it is available. So I don't know.
I think we are.
Right.
Are we okay?
Yeah.
So then I'm in agreement with Steve.
So is council okay with keeping it as we have it now? Oh, go ahead.
Just to clarify, so office was already on there? It was already down dash?
Yep, correct.
Okay. So, yeah.
Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in agreement with the Vice Mayor's comments. I empathize with the owners of Frosty's. I think I haven't talked to them personally, but I imagine their perspective is they feel like they're part of downtown. And they probably feel like, you know, the stepchild, that they don't get to participate in some of these things, even though they consider themselves downtown. But I agree, crossing Collins Street and extending it 2 blocks just to pick them up, I think kind of defeats what the initial purpose of the open container ordinance was. I guess I'm still torn. I'd like to hear more from the chief, because I know the chief advocated for reducing it from 10 p.m. to 9 p.m. And so I guess as far as that's concerned, I would agree with the chief, and I would, you know, if it makes it easier logistically and we can save money, reducing it to 9 p.m. His anecdotal, you know, observations was that it was not utilized very much from 9 to 10, so I would advocate that we cut it back to 9. However, and I'm not sure how much of a fan of this he's going to be, but I'd be curious to hear from the chief if we were to open it up earlier on Saturdays, say from 2 to 7 or from noon to 7. What does that look like logistically? Is it essentially the same regardless of where at downtown or how many hours? For every 1 hour additional that the open container ordinance is open, it's increased cost and logistical issues for you? Or would having it open earlier in the day be easier for you to staff than the 9 to 10 p.m.? Thank you, Chief.
Chief.
Mayor, Council. So we're here to get direction. So if you're asking my opinion, you know, I brought forward a couple weeks ago my observations of closing it down at 9. I was under the impression that council decided they wanted to keep it until 10. The costs of factoring the cost of that did factor in some increases in the estimated costs that it was going to, you know, the extra hour, you know, over time it adds up, and that has been presented to council for their consideration. If council wants the open container to be extended on Saturdays for earlier in the day, you know, we work at the direction of council, and so just know that would increase the costs of running this program or these events, and I would just be spitballing, but I would think that would probably go up another $6,000 or so to staff it on that extra day. But as far as the ability for the police department to staff it, as Carter and I are often, and Jill are often involved with coming to grips with the nature of law enforcement. This year in particular, we are maxed out on our ability to do overtime. We've been hit with so many critical incidents. You know, our ability to staff events such as this has been exceeded. We physically don't have the time, the sleep, the manpower to fill some of these slots, and so you know, from a logistic purpose, if you're going to add another, in this case, another 5 hours to it on a weekly basis, it's another, you know, you know, just makes it that much harder on me to staff these. So I work at the discretion of what council wants, and if you tell us you want to do that, we will make those efforts to do that.
Does council have
I think
any?
I answered your question as best I could.
Does council have any appetite for making it earlier on Saturday? Kyle's suggestion. Quick, Kyle.
So I haven't heard from any downtown business associations or the Downtown Development Authority or anybody who's advocating to start it earlier. To me, it makes more sense to do earlier on Saturday than later on the rest of the nights. But I guess my opinion at the moment, though I could be swayed pending compelling evidence either way, is I would advocate that we stick with the chief's initial suggestion that it be reduced to 9 p.m.
Council, has any conversation on that? Support for that? Yeah, Bruce.
Me personally, I like the way we have it set up right now. It affords families an opportunity to come down during the daytime that don't want to be around the alcohol, and then they can leave when the alcohol stuff kicks in, so it gives everybody their opportunity. And as far as 10 o'clock at night, in the summertime, when there's festivities going on at Rock the Block or at David Street Station, 10 o'clock's still pretty early for a lot of the crowds that are down there. And I think cutting it off at 9 o'clock, when you have a concert that's still going on till 10 o'clock, because they do shut down at 10:30, I believe. So by shutting it down at 10 o'clock, it gives everybody a chance to kind of clean up and get their stuff out of there. I think shutting it off at 9 would be a little premature based on the timing of the events and when they end down there. So the way it is right now is, I think, is working. We've only seen 1 year's model of it in a kind of reduced area. I'd sure like to at least give it another year and see how it looks. But I think anything earlier than 10 o'clock might be a little too early for some of the events that they're putting on down there. And they're bringing a lot of money into the community. They're bringing a lot of people in from out of town for those as well. So I'd hate to see us limit it anymore.
Any other conversation on that? So it sounds like we're no on extending. Does that sound right? We're no on that.
Thank you.
Yep. So as is, it looks like so far.
And Mr. Mayor, just to be clear, this is what we will prepare the resolution around then, and you should be seeing that here real soon.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Chief. I'll wait for Amber to get here. Yeah, true. Okay, Mr. City Manager, how about agenda review for next week and beyond?
Yes, sir. Thank you. As you can see, for the 17th, we have a little bit of a difference pertaining to the pre-meeting. You'll notice that it's starting at 5, and that is primarily to accommodate the request of the Youth Council and their sponsor to get some time with individual council people to do some interviews for the project that they're working on that I think most of you have been informed of. And so with that, we're proposing that start at 5. We also need to go over the audit with you that night as well, and give you the opportunity to ask some questions and that kind of thing. As to the regular meeting itself, the downtown open container area will be ready for you to consider, and like I said, based upon what you saw here tonight and what we've just discussed. Moving on to the next work session, the meeting of the 24th. You can see what we have on the agenda. We do anticipate the Fort Wyoming Center study to be back and ready to talk about as to what that study anticipates. Our drug court team is going to be coming in and visiting with you as well. As far as the bar and grill presentations are concerned, I understood that we didn't get any applications. We did get one. Oh, okay, good. Okay. So we got one at the last minute. And so I would expect that will be what you hear about Tuesday, the 24th. Turning to the back page, you all know that we have, well, not the back page. We've got a, I'm sorry, if you look at close to the back page, the meeting of the 14th, there's a number of items there that are again sort of follow-up items for you. The facility study is one that we've been anticipating, and we think we'll be ready to have that conversation with you that evening. The 1 cent survey results presentation will be actually part 2 in that for the 24th. We're anticipating having a preliminary discussion on the survey results itself, even though it doesn't say that on your sheet. You can anticipate that being more of a 2-phased discussion, the final of which would be the 14th, and we'll have recommendations that we need some direction on at least no later than the 14th. So for your purposes, please add 1% to your 24th, and you'll see that on future grid documents here coming up. Now going to the back sheet, don't forget that for the 31st, we will be bringing a budget to you. Yeah. And if you need more meetings past the 31st, we're prepared to receive that direction for a couple other evenings that you may want to talk more about the budget or at whatever time you deem appropriate. Future agenda items, of course, is the opportunity that you have to see what it is that we have on the near horizon. In the event you want to see items added or items that we may have missed or that need to be docketed, that's the purpose of this side of the grid document. And that's all I have.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
Yeah, just a comment. Next week is going to be a very busy week, obviously, but I will be attending my wife for another surgery, so I will not be here next week.
Thanks, Bruce. Anything else? Okay. Anything on legislative review, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, not for tonight.
Okay. Yep. All right, we'll just go do council around the table. So we'll start with you, Kyle.
Oh, bro.
Sorry.
You know I need a
You want me to start with
second.
Amber?
No, I got it.
All right.
Okay. Last week, I think it was last Wednesday, the Casper Area Chamber of Commerce held their Excellence in Business Awards, and I was in attendance. I believe I saw the mayor there. So props to the chamber for recognizing all of the businesses in our area and the good work they do, but also Angela Denise, is that how you say her name? She's a special waste technician at the solid waste department.
Oh, yes.
But she won the Emerging Leader Award, and she's also in the Leadership Casper program. So just wanted to congratulate Angela for her recognition, and cool to see city staff members get recognized at events like that, and advancing themselves professionally, personally. Congratulations to Angela. And then also, just we mentioned earlier, at least Flora did, that Rock the Block is intending to continue operating, and I believe at the spot it has operated historically, they're looking for vendors and donations to continue through the summer's events. So if that's an event that you'd like to attend or take your family to, if you're a potential vendor, please reach out, or if you'd like to donate to the cause to keep that going, please reach out to Dynamic Sound and Lighting, I think is who's taking it on. So reach out to them if you want to contribute in some fashion. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks. Lisa.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Amber.
Nothing.
Bruce.
Nothing for me, sir. Thank you.
Jay.
Nothing.
Steve. Kathy.
Had a Hall of Justice and Detention Center tour on Wednesday of last week. Very informative. Got to see a lot of what the jail and the kitchen and where a lot of those repairs and everything are. And over at the Hall of Justice where they're needing to replace and some of their fire suppression piping and some of that type of stuff doesn't meet code because of valve installations, things like that. And so we looked like, actually there was some good feedback on that, and looks like we ought to be able to get some of those things done a lot less expensively than what they had originally planned. Also went to the anniversary for the bus on Friday. Their little get-together, so that was to see how they're running it, and all of their stuff was very informative as well. And then, well, there were 3 of us that wound up making the fire training facility tour this afternoon at 3, and that's quite an interesting place. Yeah, so keep up the good work, Chief. You bet. And yeah, looks like then tomorrow night at 3:30 we've got the big announcement and everything for the new purchase. So, that's it.
I was gonna bring that up. 3:30 tomorrow, press conference for the police building committee over at Fire Station 1. Government night at CNFR, it should be Friday, June 17th. So that's the night that we all go there for that. And
I don't know, just Amber was laughing, so I started laughing.
Pointed at me, and I was like, well, I said go once.
June 17th.
And then June 7th, I will not be.
Thank you. Yeah, so hopefully you can make it tomorrow to the press conference. That would be great. I've just got a couple things. I'm speaking at doing a welcoming to the Wyoming Trucking Association. So I'll be doing that. And so I don't know why Every time I'm thinking, I'm like, oh man, what am I going to say? Just like, I'll do it. All right. Got a couple of different things going on. Got a meeting with Carter and Amber and some stuff we're trying to work on with Metro, and so looking forward to that. I think that's all I have, actually. I'm probably forgetting something. So that's it. So hopefully we'll see y'all tomorrow at 3:30 if you can make it. So that'd be great. Can we get a big like drape over the building and then we can have Frito can grab it
what it looks like.
and pull it? Would that be a possibility?
Run all the way down.
I know it's kind of last minute.
Have like a bunch of ninjas jump off
Yes!
the top on cords, just pulling it down as
Thank
they
you,
go.
Bruce. He sees my vision. You're wondering how I got
Police
this
officers,
position.
right?
Yeah,
Needs
how
to
about
get
our,
some
how
officers.
about our police force?
Yeah.
Repelling.
Love it.
That's a good idea.
Those are the firefighters.
Repelling officers.
Thanks for a great meeting, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.